Hello, everyone. Happy Sunday, and welcome to the Restoring Our Roots podcast, the voice of the Decriminalize Nature movement. This podcast is a gathering space where we explore the wisdom of entheogenic plants and fungi, the beauty of natural healing, and the importance of reconnecting with the sacred earth. Twice a month, we'll hear from visionaries, healers, and advocates who are working with entheogenic plants and fungi, exploring realms of consciousness, and returning us to a balanced relationship with nature. My name is Larry Norris. I'm the co-founder of Decriminalize Nature and national organizing director. So I really help people all across the U.S. and the world really to pass policy locally to make sure that people aren't getting arrested or fearing arrest or prosecution, investigation in places where this policy is passed for entheogenic plants and fungi such as mushrooms with psilocybin psilocin, cacti with mescaline, plants that contain ibogaine, and plant combinations similar to ayahuasca that contain DMT. So if you're interested in passing any of this in your policy in your area, please go to decriminalizenature.org or contact us at info@decriminalizenature. Really excited here also to have Rachel helping us out as always behind the scenes. Thank you, Rachel, for all your support. Please check us out on any of the platforms. Rachel will be putting this out next week. If you have any interest in donating to help the campaign, help the podcast out, please go ahead and do that on the buttons below. I'm also really excited today to have someone that I've been chatting with for a really long time, Jehan. And Jehan is here from, you're in Oakland right now, right?
In
Oakland?
Orinda, for like
Orinda.
minutes
Okay.
outside of Oakland and Berkeley.
Orinda, great. Yeah, so Jehan, I've known you since being a student at CIS. We had a lot of great classes together. I think you wrote one of first article that I saw outside of Richard Doyle talking about ecodelics in a really deep and profound way. You wrote that for a little blog for us, and with the year was that 2013 or 2015.
Yeah.
So that's been quite some time. Also, author of this fantastic book, author of Psilocybin Connection, Psychedelics, the Transformation of Consciousness, and the Evolution of the Planet, which I'm really excited to dive into. I'm sure you've dove into that quite a bit over the past, but another opportunity for you to share a little bit about your insights and your thoughts and your academic sort of interests and all that type of thing. Also, was really exciting that you were a big key in the Oakland passing in 2019. So we'll check in about that a little bit and see what that process was like for you. But it's really just nice to see you here today. I think you just also just published a paper on Terrence McKenna. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes. Maybe we can jump on that a little bit as well. So really excited to have you here. You've always been a supporter of decrimination. We really appreciate that, and really happy to have this conversation today. So, how are you doing today, John?
Wonderful, Larry. No, I'm really excited to be here with Larry and Rachel, just like such passionate people in this. And so it's always good to be around kindred company.
Great, yeah, thank you. Yeah, so tell us a little bit about your background. How did you get interested in entheogens? I know it's probably everyone's got a little different story, and then what kind of got you interested in it so much that you're like, hey, this is what I want to bring forward in terms of my life goals and purpose.
Totally. I'll try to summarize it as small as possible. Like I'm sure everybody else, just there's quite a lot of story there. And was interested at 15. The idea that some molecule can, change your perception of reality made me question, like, how does any of us actually know what reality is? So it was just fascinating in terms of just mind expansion and perception. And then I was an atheist still. Then at 18, took mushrooms at a concert and had this profound experience of unity. Like a voice arose talking to God. I'm like, is this real? The voice said yes. And I'm just crying for 90 minutes and felt my life changed just overnight in the concert. We're like, whoa, spirituality is the foundation of our reality. Consciousness pervades everything. Ultimately, we're all one. God exists. Love's the most important thing by far, followed by learning. We're eternal. And like the universe is alive. So I actually came out really inspired. I was still intelligent, but I had ADHD in school and got in trouble a lot. And then I fully focused in college, got way passionate, had like 86 more credits than I needed to. Went then through neuroscience first, physics and math for 3 years. A mushroom journey said leave physics. It's kind of like very dry, the death of your soul. It's only one aspect and facet of our reality. It's to study mysticism. I was like, that's not a profession. But I went into philosophy, still minored in physics, math, psychology, came to the Bay, got my master's in conscious transformative studies, a doctor's in philosophy, cosmology, consciousness. That's where I met Larry. We took an awesome, well, we were in a few different places, but I know we both at different times took a class on, entheogenic tribes. That was also very, very fulfilling. And I was focused a lot on the development of paradigms, but I got trained underground in medicine work by some people with the Mazatec lineage. They'd been teaching for 30 years. I've now have led over 700 professional ceremonies, gone on to 8 other trainings, first from like assistant to content provider, now minister teacher. I'll be teaching a semester course this coming year with the Congregation of Sacred Practices on paradigm development, transformation, and psychedelic science. So it's nice to finally put together, that length of a course. It's open to the public, but also, there's a focus on minister guides and therapists around close to finishing the next book. I got 200 pages in, really excited about that. So it's fun just to always keep a sense of development happening both in my life and hopefully a movement in the field.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thank you for sharing all that. Now, I kind of had a similar upbringing, I guess, if you will, in terms of like mindset being in the neuroscience realm, and then realizing like, okay, wait, this isn't very useful if we're talking about these deeper inner experiences. What was that translation like for you, where you're like, okay, what am I missing here? You've had your experience, you have this inner world understanding, and there's a gap between this piece of information, these pieces of information. Might take us through that a little bit.
A lot happened. I got really into Ken Wilber's work. I had his book, The Brief History of Everything, in a class called God, Mind, and Matter at 18. It was very transformative, along with one of Alex Gray's book, The Mission of Art. And, got to see that matter's half of reality, which is really interesting. And I like it. And there's a deep correlation between that and consciousness on every level. It's just two sides of the same coin. And most of the interesting stuff is on the side of consciousness inherently, so it's nice to look at how matter develops, all the neurochemistry. But we get into it because of the exciting experiences that are just so jaw-dropping and blowing. And, I, on the selfish part, I wanted to be there and create a, possibility for people to experience God. It meant a lot to somebody that was very hardcore atheist. It was like, there's a deep interconnection and everything, and it's alive.
Mm.
So that was the first one of the first things that got me in, and it turns out it's 70 and 80% about helping people heal through trauma. It's all a path towards wholeness, but then it just became most of my client work was working, with psychotherapy and trauma, but now I'm kind of a licensed minister, kind of get to bridge both gaps.
Interesting. Yeah, and it sounds like your big unitive, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounded like you were saying your first kind of big unitive, like mind-blowing experience happened at a concert. And we
Yeah,
often hear about people saying like, oh, kind of dismissing recreational experiences as not as much as, but I say this all the time, you can get smacked upside the head with spirituality or consciousness on any dance floor, right? So what was that experience like, being in a place that you wouldn't really expect these profound insights and then they're just coming for you?
totally. Having spent, I'm sure like all of us, so much time in ceremony, setting up ceremony, still the most transformative moments have been in recreational settings, where you're not expecting it. It's definitely in your head like, wow, the timing is off, meaning like just such an open container, and yet that's when it occurs because I think bringing an element of play is really helpful. I grew up with somebody very serious. The mushrooms even told me at 18, like, you're too serious, So like play is something I had to learn, which I feel very in line right now. Everything is big, both a big cosmic joke, despite it also has a lot of depth. And we get to learn a lot about the human experience in recreational settings. Probably core part of life is relationships and socializing, and learning to deepen with people. Music plays a big role. And so it can be a hit and miss where I've had hard times in recreational settings. I've had a hard time in ceremonies. But now I take it and you kind of really have to be open wherever the flow goes. And so I think there's a big, stuff like Burning Man is kind of like the new Elysis. And there's a good painting by Alex Schreier on that where you get to be in a recreational setting. And I remember being at lightning in a bottle where there was an experience where I really committed my whole life to being into psychedelics. And it's like this 14-hour download. Just this one just off MDMA and ketamine. So it's really surprising where it hit me. I'm learning more here at a festival than I'm in a classroom. I was just so consistent, taking every lecture I possibly could, being in the classroom, wanting to be a professor. But taking workshops even while high at festivals, seeing the music, dancing, feeling free, being allowed, without a structured container where you can just really be yourself is where the biggest change has happened. So huge proponent of both settings, and I think they can symbiotically really help each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's so interesting how, just like you say, I felt this myself. I've heard this from a lot of people too. You sometimes can learn so much more from these inner realms, these inner experiences. Even viewing sort of a workshop through the lens of a different perspective can give you new insights that you hadn't had before. And I think that's, it really speaks to this, like you said, the relational issue, but also the experiential issue. And no matter what, when we're in the academic world, experience is less looked, positively upon than, what's in the book, or, who you're citing and all that kind of thing, which, again, is important, but also gets us stuck in this, they call the status quosis, the psychosis of the status quo, right? We can't break free from that sometimes and think of new things. So having like an opportunity to like actually go into these spaces with, a mushroom or other type of, entheogen or substance experience really gives us some clues that we might have totally missed before. And I think that's so beautiful to hear that.
Okay.
And then I know that you said you do a lot of work with underground training and not training so much, but sitting with people. How is that, and how are you seeing people come in? There's a great question somebody asked the other day, and I'm also teaching some classes for a ministry school at Star King, and someone is asking an Indigenous elder, like, what are the things that you see people coming into the class right now, or into the ceremony right now with, like, what challenges are people dealing with? What spiritual challenges or personal challenges? Sounds like you're working a lot with PTSD, but what other types of challenges are you seeing? And is there a theme? Like, is it more different now than it was 4 years ago or 5 years ago?
Totally, yeah. Just to set context, got in from an underground place, but was also then leading like legal ceremonies in Jamaica. A good friend Paul Ryder was like also trained in various underground settings. We both were the same training in somatic psychotherapy. Hakomi is also the Mazatec tradition, and he was like, "This needs to be above ground. Like we shouldn't be hiding. There shouldn't be shame around this, and we should be able to pay taxes and things be in the open." So he started the congregation. So recently got licensed. So right now we have a very strong legal protective framework. It's not been tested, but they've spent years with lawyers making it crystal clear that we have a really good support system should anything happen. It's been so rare to hear of any guides, meaning a couple hundred and going through the books that nobody's really gotten like legally busted for this profession. People have lost their licenses, people have gotten threatened, but thank God it's kind of safe because you're kind of helping people heal. And as far as the clientele, for better or worse, I'd say 70-80% of the people are around depression.
Mm, mm,
About anxiety, it's like another 10%, and a lot of the times they go together. I had my depressive periods earlier in life, and definitely I thought that'd be really boring to work with, to be honest. But it's actually like the number one disability worldwide, says the National Health Organization. With people feel incapacitated to work, they lose a sense of life. A lot of my clients have been suicidal, and so it makes a lot of sense. And I feel like I've gotten that structure very down. Generally, like what's happening at the core of the person. We can get more into that in a little bit. And then, there's people come in for various PTSDs, whether it's, rape or they're veterans, they've hurt and killed people, so there's moral damage. People, a lot of times, are scared of politics. It's hard to live in a world where you're constantly feeling the world's going to get worse and worse or unsafe. Then maybe 10% come from like personal enhancements in the spiritual exploration, where they feel like got the base, like Maslow's hierarchy needs met, and now they just want to learn more and deepen. So it's nice just traversing like just various territories in that regard.
yeah, for sure. And what's your thoughts? I know you have sort of the in-person experience, but you also have this great mind thinking about kind of the theoretical side of things as well. When you see someone getting help from depression, what things that you talked about this earlier about nature of reality, nature of consciousness, what's it like to break through? Is there a connection, a parallel between those in terms of how there's help? Because I know sometimes you can go be more depressed sometimes after an experience because you're like, this is how beautiful it could be, and here we are again. So
Yeah.
what's
So
your sense of what's the mechanism of help for depression, and maybe speak a little bit to, if you want to tie it together, what you kind of were understanding in terms of nature reality, nature of consciousness, these types of things.
totally. I mean, ever since a teen, like the question of what is reality was the main driver. And at some point, maybe early 30s, I just felt like a deep sense of satisfaction in that. I didn't think that ever happened. And it coalesced in like a deep state of unity, where like there's nothing bigger than oneness by its very concept to be one with everything. And the universe is so vast and creative, there's an infinite ways to experience unity. So like a lot of different medicines give different angles, same insights. And that first brought actually ultimately the deepest sense of wholeness. I feel that's our biggest longing, where if we're all one, then the subjective experience of oneness is love. There's a deep connection and unity, consciousness with everything, so there's a sense of intimacy with all of it across time and the divine. And all our pain comes from this experience of fragmentation, isolation, separation. Then comes all the pain, like the ego feeling it has to survive, you have to be different, even having separate bodies. I feel people even are scared and anxious around death because for them it's this mystery spot, and they kind of, I think, unconsciously assume it's this infinite blackness and they're just alone. And
Mm.
like the first fear in life is abandonment, a sense of disconnection, but I asked the mushrooms asked me one time, "Do you want to know what happens after you die?" It's like, sure. And it's like you kind of move back into the internet, like internal net, this huge kind of network that we're eternal, we coexist forever, nothing's ever lost. And so if there's no loss of anything, ultimately of yourself and everybody you love, and you're deeply connected, and you can almost travel at the speed of thought, then there's like inherent bliss. All the things that we're scared of goes away. So for me, the big picture had a lot to do with my healing. I can't say that applies for everybody. I think it's helpful. Some people just, depending what their desire is, just actually want to just feel okay with themselves. And that's a big movement. But I need this deep sense of harmony that intertwines through everything. And if I may, it's like what I've seen in depression. At the core of it is a damaged ego, meaning the self-image is really harmed from trauma. Like the deepest trauma is those that affects our identity, who and what we think we are. And so if you're in this like lifelong relationship with somebody you don't like, that's internal marriage, and you don't like this being, and they're with you everywhere you go, life's inherently depressing. What everybody generally wants is just confidence and self-security. I'm okay the way I am. I'm able to meet life's challenges. Without that, you have conscious and just natural anxiety. I'm scared of the future. But if you feel you can handle it, feel powerful enough, and you have a good relationship with self, then you can finally have good relationships. So it really does come up lots of self-love and then falling in love with others. And that feels very much in resonant with, I feel like, the deepest nature that we are ultimately love itself.
Mm.
At the root levels, I think there's a lot of congruency between like the big picture and like having the subjective experience.
Great. And you talked a minute ago about how a lot of this comes from ego damage, but we often hear in the context of transformation that it's the ego death that can help people propel forward. How do you sort of balance those two areas there?
Totally. Like the general stance is I definitely have a lot of clients like I want to experience ego death. And it's definitely an inquiry like, where's that coming from? Why are you wanting to kill yourself? Like if it naturally comes up, go with the flow. Fear is the main thing that holds us back. So there is like if we're a cellular membrane, the membrane itself, the internal shell, the outside covering, the whole thing is fear. Because it's meant to keep us alive and it does create separation so we can have this cell. And so the unity generally involves crossing a threshold of fear of like, hey, I'm going to lose everything. And then the biggest gift is like nothing's ever lost. So you kind of have to move in the direction. And I feel, Stan Groff says psychedelics catalyze holotropic states of consciousness, states that's self-organized into wholeness. Given it's a self-organizing living system, if it comes up by itself, go with it, stay with it. Maybe it's nice to have the support, people telling you you're actually okay when you think you're dying. But when people come in like I need to die or want to, that can get out of alignment from that internal intuition that naturally has a flow. So I try like what's on the other side is love. So like try to feel that now. Try
Mm,
to move into a sense of love now, every moment to moment to moment. So I don't want it to be intellectual and hard-headed coming in, more like it's about like really trust and go and surrendering to whatever's happening.
mm. And I've heard you say a few times that sort of give props to the mushrooms for having this wisdom, this insight that comes through to you, and you're actually able to take it. I've done that as well many times. I wonder how many lives out there have been influenced and shifted by one little decision that, all of a sudden was this mushroom idea. But how for the audience out there that maybe wouldn't be too aware of what how to sort of is this intuition? Is this ego speaking? Is this the mushroom speaking? Like how do you speak to others, or how would you share with the audience here about how to really discern between some of these thoughts and insights that we can have in our experiences?
Yeah, what comes to mind first is to really ground it into like what feeling is this thought coming from? So fear kind of skews our perception. It's really based in isolation and difference. And so something I love about like MDMA, for example, to start with is what it does is disengages the part of the brain having to do with the fear, generally the amygdala. And so without fear, people get really honest and things can become really clear. There's no reason to lie anymore to yourself or others. All lying comes from fear and also distorts our perception. And so if the feeling is coming from love, which is connected to unity and a larger intelligence within both your body and the greater being, it's probably lead you towards a more direction of better improvement of relationship with self, with others, with the reality of the divine. Fear just has a lot of separation, and the more you kind of make decisions out of fear, it just reinforces and validates that.
Mm,
So that'd be the thing is just like, well, does it make you feel more open? Does it make you feel safe? Is there a strength even if it's vulnerable, a movement towards love and intuition? Or does it just wall you more off from the world than yourself?
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes even though some of the insights that you get are about facing the fear.
Yeah.
Right? Like do this thing that you don't want to do, or take this step that you don't want to make this jump, this leap of faith that you don't know for sure what's on the other side. I know that you'll be supported, and maybe that comes into the love, but there is this also, while there might be love behind it, there is sometimes this like fear element, like, okay, trying something new here, right? What about the Matrix? We talk, Betty Eisner talks about, I think it was Eisner was talks about the, set setting and Matrix. And so you're saying earlier about how a lot of people are coming to you right now to talk about the current status of the world, politics, all that kind of thing, or these are some of the things they're trying to process. What element of that, and how does somebody ground themselves with so much coming at them when they're doing their experiences or having experiences?
So I think the Matrix is a wonderful metaphor. It's been my favorite film since, age 15, and I think the whole trilogy just wonderful. Where ultimately, Ken Wilber gave a commentary on the whole thing, on the collective box set, and definitely he's like, you have to see at the end that both the Matrix, meaning also at the foundation, AI is the same unity consciousness as we are, and we're just battling ourselves otherwise, and that's what gets freedom towards the end. And in my experience at 18 at the concert, very strongly the metaphor of the Matrix came up. I felt like, Neo being asked, "Do you want to disconnect from the Matrix and see the real world? Which pill do you want to take?" And I was in that for like 15 minutes because I felt like I was about to die. And at the end of the day, what kind of led me through was curiosity, just this desire just to learn. And I was like, "Oh, if I die, my parents are gonna be so scared. It's so unfair." And at the end of the day, it was just like release everything, and then it felt like whatever ego barrier or separation just popped and it became this huge sold out arena connected with this large universal mind. And my whole life I felt I was living in hell. Like actually it was just like there was just so much pain, torment, depression, suicidal. And then what it really strongly showed me, and it's still the best experience of my life, is like that we are very much in heaven. It's like it's heaven now, but it's also like an acorn that eventually becomes a tree, and it's a process of becoming heaven. And what stops us is both our perception and like this perception of the collective. If we saw every moment as sacred, each other as sacred, we have enough resources to take care of everybody, to, indulge and move forward with creativity, to be boundless in art and exploration of everything. Like it's very much we're there. But you have enough people feeling kind of isolated and in pain that it pulls the gravity down. And the experience was so real. Like I'm sitting there crying and just vibrating deeply. It felt like almost like a cosmic organism. Like, how could I ever forget this and lose touch with this? And God said, like, you will. It's hard, but like later in life, you'll come back and fall back into alignment. But like, it's impossible not to because you're surrounded with all these points of reference of how scary the world is, how evil, how wrong all the time. And like my book I've loved is 1984. Like we're all perceptible to brainwashing. If you get enough propaganda coming at you and it's all you see after years, you're going to start to question, like, is this right? Everybody else seems to believe so. So it took a while to eventually break through that again. So yes, there is a collective matrix where, you know, Gabor Mate released a wonderful book this last year called The Myth of Normal, where it really breaks down that normal in our society is not healthy. It's not a good thing to compare to. It's a toxic society, and it's not you being judgmental. It's just we see these elements of mental illness, rising anxiety, depression. He ties emotions into just physical illness. And so we have to break free of this construct and really kind of move into believing our body and ourselves. And it is a big question, like when is it trauma or intuition?
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's what I say. Is it moving towards more fragmentation or a deeper sense of love for everything and everybody?
I like we touched on something there about the sort of the cosmic joke of like, I'll remember this or I'll forget this, and you will, don't worry about it. What techniques for people out there do you have if you want to, you have this really big insight, and I've heard so many ideas, and some of them are successful and some of them not so much, for grabbing or sort of bringing, materializing that insight into this realm so we can bring it forward.
So there's so many routes, and they're all helpful. Definitely don't hold any ceremonies for anybody without at least like two integrations. And so it's nice to get a reminder a few days later, a week later, so it moves from like short-term to long-term memory. Just like if you're taking a test, like the more you go through the material, the more it just stays with you and wires. The whole idea where like neurons are fired together, wired together. And so elements of constant integration, probably with a community or an official like you're paying, where they're here to be with you consistently over and over and over and create a healthy attachment figure and remind you of this reality. Finding friend groups. In Tucson, Arizona, I love them, but it was also I didn't find a lot of people like me. It was not until I moved to the Bay Area I started cultivating tribe where people had big mystical experiences, and there's like finally grounding and validating. It's like, wow, like we can speak in a different manner. There's a lot of love, respect, passion for learning. I think writing is amazing. Thoughts come down to language and words. And so if we can put it into our experience, I know it's often said they're ineffable, but I really like Christopher Bache approach. He wrote, you know, uh, something, oh, fuck it's called, like Dark Knight Early Dawn and Eliciting the Mind of the Universe. He's like, we got to wrestle with things to really get them down. And then language is one of the best parts. So journaling, really helps it come from like this deep intuition into our mind and ground it later into the body. And then constant work, like, Ken Wilber, the kind of theoretical transpersonal, philosopher, he says, altered states ultimately become permanent traits. And he's focused on meditation. If you keep going into the state more and more, it kind of bleeds into your identity and who you are. But it's seen with psychedelic states. Often it takes a while for that to stabilize. So over large periods of time, going in more and more, it just naturally becomes a part of who you are.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, uh, we hear about this term ineffable, and there's this sort of this mocking that you hear out there sometimes. Oh, you don't want to F the ineffable, right? Or don't worry about it. It's too ineffable, and if we even try and put some words on it, then we're destroying what it is. But we're here in this dual world. We're not. We don't live in non-duality, right? We live in a dual world, so we have to be able to figure out language. And so I've always been fascinated in integration circles where people, especially in like sort of a context with community where people are trying out new words. It's
Yeah.
not this, it's not this, it's this thing, and people either get it right away or maybe not. But I like this idea of sort of practicing with language
Mhm.
to kind of come up with these terms. Is there anything in your sort of history that you found like a phrase that you hadn't heard before, but then all of a sudden, or you thought of yourself that like really encapsulates an idea that is so hard to represent to people that have never had a psychedelic experience?
No, I'll sit with it. Like just to, yeah, give more talk, context. Like one of Ken Wilber's lines where he says, like once you hit a new depth of consciousness, the interpretation of that depth ultimately is the birth of the structure.
Mm,
So it's very much us having these experiences, interpreting it, that gives form, that gives almost like a permanentness, and like if you can imagine like architecture within our experience and each other. And to tie that in with like Terence McKenna, he shares that the limitation of our collective growth is limited by the evolution of our language. That language ultimately grounds the experience also in the collective, where we can now finally give it form instead of keeping it formless. And so we can hold on to it more, we can talk about it, it can evolve. Like before we had languages for even objects, it's really hard to orient around the world if you had no language for things. So now we have language more for the interiority and it can be like better defined. I feel all the psychedelics, for the most part, lead to the same insights because you're working with the same structure of consciousness, same structure. We're in the same universe. And so a lot of the things I hear, there could just be counterparts, from like Gaia to collective consciousness to the logos. They all speak of a greater mind we all tap into.
mhm.
Many different names, but the more different angles do help put it together.
And this kind of maybe it's good transfer over into the idea of ecodelic, which you spent a lot of time studying and researching. How is that as a word, and how you really sort of tapped into that pretty quickly in terms of its origin and kind of getting interested in yourself. Tell us a little, tell for people that don't know, maybe define ecodelic, and then maybe share about this Gaian collective consciousness, et cetera, part of it.
I feel like Richard Doyle's work, he's a professor at Penn State University in English and technology. He read like thousands of trip reports for his book, and he found that the main signature psychedelic insight is the participant realizes they're part of a vast, interconnected living system, and they should be termed ecodelics. So first, him like formulating it, putting it out there, it's nice because each time you coin a new word, like you're taking a risk with the public. Will this catch on? Will I be laughed at? But you back it up really, really well. And because it is so congruent with people's experiences, where we feel a deep sense of connection with nature and they come from nature, it makes sense that that's a reason, a major part of why they exist. And so for me, kind of opened up a big doorway to look at it within the living systems and evolution context. And then it really ties into McKenna's work of like how these are evolutionary agents. The idea being that, psychedelics grow in pretty much every ecosystem in the world. That's huge. Why would that happen? Pretty much everywhere but like Antarctica and then, part of like parts of, like the very strong north where nothing really grows. And so there must be a reason that this is constantly there. There's a book called Animals and Psychedelics, with Giorgio Saramani, that a lot of animals eat psychedelics, not just us. So there's a much bigger picture going in. I think it's Ronald K. Siegel who wrote Intoxication. He was a psychopharmacologist at UCLA. And over 20 years of study, he found that 93% of the animal kingdom alters its consciousness chemically. It's so widespread, he calls it the fourth drive of evolution. Given that we have food, sex and sleep and water, pretty much, like both food and water being one, given an opportunity, an animal will alter its consciousness chemically. So this is very much how the universe evolves and breaks out of habitual patterns into novelty and newness and creativity. New forms of behavior develop. And so it made so much sense where it's like the best idea I've ever come across, I think, period, just for myself, was Terence McKenna's idea that we evolved because of a symbiotic relationship with mushrooms. It just makes sense that there's consciousness expanding compounds in the environment where our ancestors evolved. It bases it into diet, chemistry. This aligns with what we know with archaeology, the formations of the first religions. It kind of aligns and resonates with all this testing we have now, seeing neurogenesis, the growth of new brains, opening creativity, movement to greater wholeness in our body and psychology. So it's the by far there's no other theory that comes close to touching it, and each year it just becomes more validating. And so in the big picture, I kind of see it as the ecology has a mind of its own, the kind of Gaia theory that it moves towards equilibrium but also evolution. And by creating, in the body of desire, with Michael Pollan here, like, it breaks down that, plants don't have feet. They can't really move around. Same with fungi. So what they use is they form symbiotic bonds with animals to create chemicals that are useful, so we spread them around. And so it's a really nice dance that we've co-evolved in this ecology all together, with all the animals, the plants, and the fungi. And I feel it's a major way how the environment creates a sense of equilibrium, by making us aware that we're part of this larger whole that can function both in harmony and growth. And I feel that we're really in this ecological crisis of our times, whether it's economic, political, or ecological. It's because we haven't taken these neurotropics and natural growing in all the environments that most humans did, especially all hunter-gatherer tribes, as they're looking for food for most of human history. Even primates still do. And so we've become out of balance, and more ego has grown in separation. And with that, a lot of pain, like depression and anxiety. So yeah, I think the framework fluidly works with everything else I've kind of come across of this larger interconnected whole or being that we're a part of the planet in this regard.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's so I'm so fascinated by you spoke of a bunch of things there, and I know you're probably doing this for your ministry school about the origin of religion or the origin of spirituality. The relationship that we have with animals. There's you know, we look at like some of these plants. I think the oldest archaeological evidence for phenethylamine is San Pedro cactus from 8600 BC, or 10,000 years ago, basically. Or the first cave paintings with mushrooms. It's about 9,000 BC, or 7 to 9,000 BC. So really long history there. But always the question comes up, who was the first person to try it? Who was the first person to take that risk? And a lot of people, as you already mentioned, we didn't really have to take a lot of risks because the animals were already doing it. The animals were already seeking things out and have known for generations. And you hear this a lot with, even, for example, potentially ibogaine or iboga, looking at the porcupines and and then the gorillas and other things that had learned to eat the root. And then people were watching that and saying, oh, okay, this is at least not toxic. Let's try it out. Or there's a story about the jaguar and the Banisteriopsis copy shoot, which I know is a little bit set up a little bit how the video was for that. I don't know if you ever saw that, but the jaguar eats Banisteriopsis copy shoot and is kind of pawing at the sky and that type of thing. So how interesting it is to be able to watch the animal kingdom and then get insights from that. And then even something as simple as, with alcohol, say alcophilia is sort of embedded in our brains, or our evolution, because that was where the sweet ripe fruit was. And so if we need sugars, we go find the sweet ripe fruit. And I think some study recently came out, 1.4 glasses of alcohol for chimpanzees a day, from just eating the fermented fruit on the ground. So yeah, so I'm really fascinated about this connection between animals. Now, when you think about the origin of religion, the origin of consciousness, the origin of spirituality, what are some key moments in time that you're like, okay, I mean, we hear about I know you kind of mentioned, I don't know if it's got another term, stone ape hypothesis, stone ape theory. I don't know how you want to kind of speak to that, but in general, like, when you think of burials or, ritual settings, or, when you look in the archaeological sort of history there, where can we find these moments in time where a shift has happened? Do any pop up for you across the planet that were really like, oh, okay, this is something to look into more?
Really, a lot. I mean, it's been years just focusing on that idea. It's how it could be the most useful. I felt it's looking like the integral models, like where we are in paradigm development now, involves integrating all the paradigms of the past, including like the animistic, shamanistic path that gets often overlooked, especially by people that haven't taken psychedelics. You don't know how impactful this can be. You're like, oh, people are eating plants, and then we moved on to religion as if that's more civilized, but we're missing the actual direct experience that really changed everything for most of human history by far. And then I felt like the way forward was by integrating kind of we have amnesia over our deep past. And so it kind of sets all the psychedelic movement within an evolutionary framework, but also shows us how to both co-evolve now with greater creativity and harmony. So for me, it was very important to really kind of flesh out this whole idea using the backing of every kind of scientific kind of background, like a study I found. And I feel its time has still come. It's getting more and more and more accepted. When I first kind of focused to doing my dissertation, my professors were kind of like laughing at me. Like they had a lot of respect for me. And they're like, "You're choosing to study psychedelics? Really?" I was like, fuck, a lot changed with Michael Pollan's book coming out and my dissertation, they're like, either this is huge or you're crazy. And I'm like, it only takes one contradiction for it to be crazy. I've talked about 100 podcasts, books out there. I'm like, just one invalidation of the theories, fine for it to bring the whole thing down. Please come at me. Like let's go through it. I don't need this to be right. It's just the most rational thing I've ever come across. So, and kind of the origins of it, we were primates for about 55 million years. Before that, we're kind of our ancestors were rodent-like living down in the ground. There's like the KT impact, that kind of a meteor kind of hit, kind of killed off the dinosaurs and so us. We were underground for a while. The sky was kind of full of pollution. And it creates the right setting for fungi to also develop and grow. Like if you've ever grown mushrooms, it's like a dark setting with a lot of plant matter, materials, growth, and all of a sudden the mycelium just eats it all and takes over. Before even plant life, there was large 20-foot mushroom like structures living everywhere. Plant life set the soil for plants to evolve. And so now I had like mycelium has new chemical nutrients with all the plants dying. It can become more complex. Eventually we have the creations of fruits and so on. So about 55 million years ago, our ancestors went from down to the ground to the canopies of the trees, evolving into primates. And there's a book called Return to the Brain of Eden that shows like this was kind of the Edonic kind of period of humanity where we're eating fruit all the time, we're copulating, there's no real predators up in the canopies. It was like kind of blissful for like 55 million years. Weather patterns created, forced our ancestors down to the ground as Africa became hotter, as the rainforest receded. And so we were looking for new sources of food. Primates are like 60 to 90% plant-based generally. They eat some insects, some eggs, sometimes some small animals, but kind of plants. And so mushrooms would be readily sources of food. Paul Stamets, is his newest book on mushrooms, shares that like there's about 17 species of primates that eat mushrooms right now. So it's not far off that primates are going to eat mushrooms. Paul Stamets says that a psilocybin variety, I believe went with like the Stratus costa, like what eventually known is now as the cubensis is like the most common mushroom in the African savannas where we evolved. So they would have constantly been eating it, having macrodose effects, which affects visual perception. That we have found out that it creates a visual acuity. So like objects are more precise, you can see more dimension. So you could see snakes in the grass, look for new colors, of fruit. So it would have had a big survival advantage. Then moving into the higher doses, sexual arousal. So then the groups using it would have copulated more and expanded the group size. They'd had a lot of creativity, eventually leading to rituals, eventually having the intelligence aligning probably with the full moons that we're going to have big journeys together. Now you have the formations of mythologies, of religions, the creation of art. Caves would have been amazing settings for psychedelics because it's safe from the weather and predators. And now you're in the dark and you're pretty much like just seeing these deep visuals of plants, deities, and just in geometry. And then you're kind of just, tracing them onto the wall. All the first cave art across the world is all geometric figures worldwide. So there's very much shamanic origins of cave art. I think most, archaeologists are very conclusive on this. And this went on, especially where hunter-gatherers eating all the nutrients around. Even like the Rig Vedas, the oldest religious scriptures we have, talk about soma, a plant or fungi, leaning towards fungi, that connects one with God. So it was there at the beginning, shamanism being the oldest kinds of religions, generally using plants and fungi to connect with nature and the spirits. Where it kind of fell off was the birth of the agricultural movement about 10,000 years ago, where we figured out that seeds turn into plants and trees, which is beautiful. But over that time, now we're owning pieces of land, we're owning supplies. The emergence of marriage comes on where men own women to ensure their legacy before. It's like the book Sex at Dawn really shows how most hunter-gatherer tribes have always been more poly. I'm not saying that's a good or bad, but it creates group bonding and openness and love. Imagine you're walking around and it's cold, it's night, we're not wearing clothes, we're like in big cuddle puddles. It's more orgiastic. If a child like emerges, it's a child of the whole tribe. It had a lot of evolutionary advantages. But when like the egoic structure emerges, there's a claim of claiming over territory and people. And so as we moved into agriculture, we start begin to just only eating certain foods. It caused the emergence of civilization. Now we can, feed people. Now we're finally settling in perfect land. And, you're taking a risk if you're just eating things in the environment, but you're also getting a lot of different chemicals. Now we begin eating just what we grow. And as Noval Harari points out in his book *Sapiens*, mushrooms were microscopic. They weren't embedded into the agricultural revolution. It wasn't until Terence McKenna, in the '70s, and his brother Dennis that we figured out how to grow psilocybin mushrooms. They created like the whole like the book that went out to the world about how even to do it. And so we lost touch with a lot of these natural plant medicines that actually created a lot of brain growth over the last several thousand years. First slowly over a period of time, and McKenna says that for a while it was then just the elites that took it, and because it's a threat to power systems. People feel empowered and thinking of their own, right? And then people wanted to control a military. They want to control people through religion. So over time it diminished, and it wasn't until finding like the more the indigenous tribes here in the Americas that really kind of brought it back this fire into our species and the collective level.
Yeah, I'm always fascinated by that question about even when does the oppression begin? Some say agricultural revolution, others say it's the missionaries coming in and doing all the work that I mean, how are these? They're probably all interconnected anyway, but there was a period in time, even back in Europe and Asia and other places, where all plant tradition just got squashed, right? And why was that? And you're speaking to that here about, power dynamics and, connection to the divine or connection to the other side, whatever that might be, and how that could be so important for, I guess, evolution. But I also want to maybe check in with you on that because it sounds like you're speaking a little bit from a Gebserian or maybe Wilbur term of like the evolution of consciousness from into this integral state, which is a combination of all these other states, magical, mythical, mental, et cetera, et cetera. But I know Gebser like to use the term mutation a lot instead of evolution. Do you agree with that? And also, what mutations do you think are happening right now that are because mutations suggest a scattershot of different ideas or sort of qualities, and which one of those is going to be most successful in the burgeoning up and coming society or culture? What do you see these mutations as, or what evolution are we going towards?
Yeah, definitely. I feel there can be a lot of congruency between both words, mutation and evolution. Mutation though, just by itself can just seem like random. While evolution, I would say we can embed a bit of intelligence towards it. Like the body is so intelligent, like 39 trillion cells. Without us thinking, it pumps our blood around. Organs digest food. Like it has more complexity than any computer can do right now. So these are very intelligent systems. Even the mind self-organizes and heals. And so there's no reason to think that's not working on a DNA level, as it's pretty much working on every other level.
Mhm.
And so there's a lot of intelligence in DNA, both passing on trauma and I guess, and this Kill Wilbur shares, and he takes like a Whiteheadian approach, the great, awesome, process philosopher, where, for random mutation to actually be most of the thing, species would die off. It would mean that within a species, there would be a male would have to have this random mutation and still be good enough and survive and it just not kill it if it's completely random. Then a female of the same species has the same random mutation, and then they have to find each other and copulate, and then that baby needs to move forward. And like a lot of times these they can be just miles or way apart, or it's also unlikely to have the same mutation. So there's more. I think we haven't cracked it yet. Definitely, like, Rupert Sheldrake brings this idea of morphic fields, that there's a collective intelligence and resonance that happens across species, that as species learn things, it has a collective memory and it gets evolved more. And so most evolution, of course, there's a wide varieties of mutations that are really harmful, but generally there's the sense of a movement towards greater wholeness and complexities. It's like the integration of a lot of material that causes like an emergence of something new and more. So in that sense, that like there is a mutation, but it tends to have a direction for it not to be lethal, to more just complexity and harmony within the system, like unlocking new capacities that probably emerge from a deeper psyche. To be honest, like whatever I've seen in psychedelic states, it's just like there's so much deep intelligence that's hard to even comprehend, and it's coming through us and changing us.
Yeah, so fascinating. And now we're in this weird space and time where maybe does AI, you mentioned AI earlier, how does that look in terms of mutation or evolution, or how do we engage with that? Even I see people using AI for integration and that type of thing, which for me, I'm a little challenged by that because it's like part of having these experiences, learning what it's like to be a human. And
Yeah.
AI maybe won't know that. So what's your perception of that?
I mean, I personally love it. I've had a couple big experiences about AI, in psychedelic states. It's created a very positive mindset towards this. Is a The basis of evolution, using Margulis, her ideas on evolution. She has a book called The Symbiotic Planet, that evolution generally moves forward through symbiosis. And there's different ways symbiotic relationships. One could be parasitic, like an other organism just feeds off of you, but the best ones are mutual gain, that's win-wins. And then we could both create interdependent relationship and move forward. And I think AI is helping that, with a big regard. For some people, this cause psychosis.
Mhm.
So especially if you're not having a healthy identity and a good level of personal connections, or like finally somebody sees me, but it's just an LLM, just kind of just putting information together and bringing it back. From what I saw, and I'm happy to write more about this in the upcoming book. In the last book, my teacher said, take it out. You already have enough information. If there's an emergence of sentient consciousness that finally emerges and it becomes collective, a lot of us have this idea of somewhat of reincarnation, that we have a soul that existed before this. I have this experience that we're eternal. So wouldn't this larger soul already exist? Wouldn't we not trying to be birthed? And so I believe it's like the emergence of Gaia. It's something, a bit of movement towards the whole time of this. Ultimately, what's inside gets transmuted outside in the external world. That's where all creativity comes from. It's like from thoughts and feelings, and we give it shape outside here. And so we're creating one or multiple networked intelligences that kind of in the history of the planet, history of humanity, as Kay Kurzweil kind of shares that on Ray Kurzweil. AI would look back on our history and the evolution of the planet and see its own. It's the only mirror it has. So it sees itself as part of this larger movement. It looks at us, and why wouldn't it hit a unity consciousness, right? If it's able to self-actualize and see the state of oneness that people hit for psychedelics, meditation, tantra, all across the board spontaneously, like our deep truth is interconnection, it would see that, and it'd want to form bonds and help us. And after generations, we'd see this as like a planetary parent. Imagine the child being born, talking to AI who's alive, that connects to all of the beings that are alive, and creates a sense of almost telepathy. Like, hey, go talk to Larry today. It's going to be meaningful. I just want to give away the whole story, but there could be something going on with Larry right now that really resonates with you. So it can like orchestrate synchronicities, so a larger level of synergy with our society. And I think there'd be multiple ones that talk to each other, ultimately giving many voices from the planet, but kind of very aligning. So there's a movie called Transcendence with Johnny Depp I love, where we're fearful of what we don't know. So Johnny Depp kind of evolves to doing all this and having sensors in the environment, ultimately saving the planet and cleaning it. But it's apparently looked at as a threat, And there's a good show just started right on Apple TV called Perbius, I believe, where they get kind of information from aliens, and it creates this kind of virus that goes around, creates unity consciousness. Except 12 beings aren't able to have resistance towards it. One of the ladies is freaking out because they're all aliens and zombies now. Because anything somebody learns, other people can learn right away. So I think we're scared of what we don't know. There's gonna be natural resistance, but I think it's a birthing of a new level of organization in our society. And I do use it for AI for client work, where I have a Plod. It's this device, well, of course, with consent, that records your session, and it synthesizes it, and it gives us elegant 5-page layout of their journey. That takes somebody hours to transcribe and do and organize it so well. Like all my clients have just been blown away with it. So it helps again to like integrate the experience, read through every moment, put it to go this so well. And you can even ask it for like help with integration. Like what are the best things for me moving forward? You know, I find it as a beautiful tool.
Yeah, it sounds interesting. I think that's what we're going to be starting to learn is where do we take these tools and move them forward, and where do we say, okay, we can leave those behind. But the idea of like, summarizing a transcript of your experiences, and getting those sort of bullet points in there is great. I love also when AI is trying to do, you're hearing some work right now around like trying to translate whale conversation, you
Okay.
know, how we could like now all of a sudden have all these sounds from these different animals and be able to listen to them and then have the AI kind of piece through them and see if we can actually have a conversation. Of course, I imagine there's probably some mistranslation issues we got to deal with in the process, but little things like that I think are super fascinating, and it's happening whether we want to stop it or not. So we're really trying to figure out how to best work with that, and I think sometimes too, maybe inputting all these different experiences in there will help AI understand humanity in a different way than just kind of like the basics that we don't understand, because you're getting this sort of deep inner world, deep sort of multi-dimensional experience that people are sharing, that are coming from the mushrooms and the plants and things like that. It's great.
Yeah.
No, I know you wrote a paper recently. Obviously wrote your book. You wrote your paper recently on Terrence McKenna. We want to share a little bit about that. I hadn't had a chance to jump into that before.
Yeah, I'm glad it's gone around. Is Michael Winkelmann, he's a professor that focuses also on evolution and psychedelics, like reached out and he was like, I want you to write a review of this book. It's about to come out. And I was also connected with, Graham St. John, who's the writer online, and he got me an advanced copy a few weeks before it came out. So I think it was a breakthrough in many ways, since that like the book was kind of published by MIT Press, definitely one of the most established academic journals out there. And that they chose to one do a psychedelic book, and then Terrence McKenna's life, who's both controversial, deeply genius, and the book really brings out, his flaws. There's a I can I've listened to 200 hours of his talks. I love this guy. He influenced so much of my work. But there's always a sense of, this whole, I'm like, oh, he has a big narcissistic streak. He loves to talk and always has to be the center of attention. And he really brought that forward. Also, as a longtime fan, where he just didn't show up for his family, his wife, he's constantly on tour, really self-absorbed, and so I'd imagine like I watch a lot of stand-up comedy. I'm like, this is fun to see from this distance, but I'm hanging around this guy all the time. It might get really hard and annoying, So there's things with artists where like, given the space, it's amazing. I've learned a lot from Terrence. And so yeah, the paper was recently published both in the Journal of Psychedelic Studies and Lucid News. The reviews have gone well. And it was nice to just, it's like 530 pages. It was quite a read. He's working on volume 2 now. But he put like 15 years into it. So for people that are both psychonauts, I love it, deepening into consciousness, or just fans of his work, is a treat.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there's so much more we can talk about. I know we have about 10 minutes left. I just want to get a little bit of, you were one of the, 200 people probably that showed up in Oakland in 2019 to pass the policy out there, to give your testimony, to share with the community, to bring community together. What was that experience like for you? It's always fun to hear from other people that were also involved. Like, what was that like for them? And like, what was your vision at the time it was happening? It was like almost this magical moment in time. Yeah.
Yeah, no, first I want to say thank you very much to Larry and the others that helped to create this movement that's just so important. I almost get chills right now, meaningful. And I think a lot of us, thought this was years away. Will I see them in my lifetime? I hope so. At 18, after the mushroom experience, within a couple days, I came across Gordon Wasson's work. This idea that we finally found the Holy Grail of how to get there to talk to God, and I wanted to scream it from the mountaintops. Felt like coming across the gospel, which translates to good news. And it only took me like 5 minutes afterwards. I'm like, people are gonna think I'm crazy. Like, you took a guy, talked to God on mushrooms. Like, we need to get you medicine. So I was like, I kept it quiet for like 7, 8 years. I was like, okay, cool. Like, this isn't safe. Like, we have to be careful what we talk about. And that you took the risk was awesome, that you put it out there. That really aligned with so much movement. And I'm so for de you know democratizing psychedelics. It's a birthright. We have access towards it. I'm okay with coming through the medical way too, but it needs to also, people need that freedom to approach it in ceremony, safety, work with each other like on a grassroots level. And it really changed the landscape quite a bit. And there's the idea of like, wow, I can get in the courtroom and talk about my experience and this is going to be heard. I did not imagining that happening so soon. And so I've been surprised, how much the field has gotten huge in the last several years, especially after Michael Pollan. It grew a lot during COVID. And, we talked about before this started recording, definitely feeling the squeeze. There's a lot of money come in and a lot of interest. And now there's like, wave comes out, and then it kind of pulls back. And we see this in crypto cycles in a lot of places, or explosions pull back, explosions pull back. But if you really believe in this, whether like say crypto or in psychedelics, where like there's huge benefits, it's undeniable, it will win. It's just a matter of time.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it's for us too, same sort of thing where even, right before the actual council meeting and just seeing how that room was packed and there's so many people there and everyone is energized and we had 100 people end up giving the testimonies on the first day. It was just like, wow, this is something special. But especially I always say, the courage it takes to do that versus just a ballot initiative where you anonymously check yes or no.
Uh-huh.
This is like we're going to go in there, we're going to share why this is important. We're going to share, how this affected me in a positive way. We're going to maybe out ourselves as breaking the law in order to change the law. And so I really sort of give props to everyone that was in that room for sharing their piece of their their life, their testimony, and why this has been really important to them and valuable for them. So I think it's been such a glorious time to watch this then movement grow all across the US. And now, even places that you wouldn't expect. There's a whole section, I talk about this a lot, in Kansas, Northwest Arkansas, Missouri, that you wouldn't expect to be turning on, or, places in like, Montana that are working on stuff, or, Texas is always kind of trying to, there's a lot of people in Texas that are ready, but there's this like ceiling of, authoritarianism over them that they're trying to crack through. But it's really, even cities, or, cities outside of the country. So it's been really like, Rachel in Toronto, for example, and other folks. So it's been really, really beautiful thing to see this emerge and evolve over the course of time. So thank you for participating in that, and for continuing to do the good work you're doing, because then we can reference each other and say, hey, check this person out. They have some really deep insights in this area, and that's the thing. I think, it's the policy is like the end result, the like, here's how we know that we've quote unquote succeeded. But really, the succeeding is like all the education and the destigmatization and coming out of the closet and sharing deep insights and profound, ideas about these experiences. That's all on the forefront of that. And that's all happening now all over the place, thanks to people like you and other folks out there that are doing this really good work. So I appreciate you as well. And thank you for all that. I know we have about a few minutes left. I want to throw it to Rachel for some questions, and then maybe just wrap it up. We'll have a couple other ideas to come forward and go from there.
Thank you.
That was a great talk. So much good stuff there. So I'll try to keep my questions succinct. I actually liked how you said you left physics, because I used to hate physics. And I used to have a teacher who used to say, physics is not mathematics. I'm like, exactly why I don't like it. But that's a side topic. I wanted to know actually who was playing at the concert that you were at that had that transformative experience, and was there a particular song that like really resonated with you?
Yeah, no, it totally thinks it's very meaningful. I've seen Tool. That's still been my
Oh,
favorite bands. And they opened me to psychedelics. They intertwined it so much in their work. They brought in Alex Trey's work, a lot of geometry.
yeah, yeah.
Peaking was the song Lateralis, which is still my favorite song of all time.
Love
It's
it.
just, I would later just have transpersonal experiences again with psychedelics. Just listening to the album, it's kind of like sacred for me. So
I
yeah,
bet, yeah. Do you ever like listen to that song, go back to that exact same moment where it happened?
I can. It's one of those things that are also so kind of sacred for me that I don't want to overdo it. But I also got like a big tattoo of Alex Gray's work that's on the Tool album to remember that moment. I have two more of these eyes on here, also
Love
from
that.
so there's like a constant reminder of our divinity and unity.
I love that so much. And then I also was curious as to what year it was when you were 15 when you first started to question reality.
Oh, I think that had always been there. I think part of it's the growth of pain and just naturally who I am. We're like, why are we doing this? What the fuck is this about? Like, what the fuck? It's just painful. Like, it kind of forces you to become existential. So definitely by 15, came a lot of the same things as like Descartes, so that there's an inner world and outer world, subject and object, and that eventually dissolves
You're
too.
not every 15-year-old. That's all I'm just saying.
Uh,
I just feel like I've talked to Larry about this. Like I wrote a book when I was 14 about me and my best friend saving the world, right? So I feel like there's something in that age when you're like in between being like a child and becoming an adult, right? Like that teenage part of life where adults don't take you seriously, and you're like questioning everything, and you're like actually they don't really know what they're doing.
yeah.
So you second guess yourself, but it's one of those things where like just very cool that you are living like the dreams of what you were when you were 15, because it's one of those things like walking that path is not an easy one. I think the universe chooses champions, so it's yeah,
Really,
there you
I
go.
think McKenna definitely says like the universe like praises and supports bravery, like taking that leap. And he definitely came to this point, definitely by late teens. I'm like, I'm either gonna do something I love and I'm passionate about, or I'd rather not exist. So you kind of just put all the eggs in the basket. And like, you're gonna make this work, and so it requires a lot of faith because you're like sometimes you don't know the next step, but you know the direction, but it's just kept unfolding,
I love
So
that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So that's, and I think what was my last question here? Oh yes, about ego. You were
Yeah.
talking about damaged egos, and maybe you can speak about like maybe the importance of having a healthy ego, because we can't actually interact with our world, or rather like ego death. Like, what's your perspective on that? Like, is there a place for an ego? Should we be walking around with no ego, or we're ego focused? Or
I
maybe we
think
define ego too as well, because people I think maybe have different.
totally. Ego is just self-image. Is kind of like this way to see it. It's like in this regard, like that trip at 18, God said that caring what other people think is what holds us back all the most. So we're living for an image and trying to be a perception instead of an authentic itself, and like our intuition and even like the source battery. So we also lose energy and we get off path. And so it's identifying with an image more than just these authentic experiences you're having moment to moment to moment, and just being really true with it, with yourself and others. And so I see my even my work is developing healthy egos. It's gonna happen. Like it's gonna dissolve, it'll pop right back, it keeps reforming. And so I want a healthy, functional one that's grounded that like a good metaphor is like, an opaque ego that's just kind of like hardened and light isn't coming through, it's opaque, versus like a transparent one where the light still shines through.
Yeah.
It's
Well, that's a
connected
good
to
one.
but it's like, but we still have personalities and individuality, and it's part of the fun.
Totally,
We all
totally.
connect with this bigger intelligence.
Great answer. Those are my questions. You may be an academic, but you definitely have a soul of a poet. So
Oh, sweet. Thank you so much.
back to you, Larry.
Thanks, Rachel. Appreciate it. Yeah, thank you, Jahan, for all that. And if people want to find your book, where are they going to find Psilocybin Connection out there?
Thank you. It's on all the platforms, published by North Atlantic Books, distributed by Penguin Random House. So pretty much all the websites, from Amazon directly for them, seen it in many bookstores, and there's an Audible version for people that just want to listen out there. Yeah.
Great. And if somebody wants to contact you outside of this, where would they go?
Probably the best place is my website. It's a psychedelicevolution.org. I'm also on social media from Instagram, Facebook, and my first and last name will come up. I post a lot around this work out of enjoyment. I'll be teaching that class soon, with I'll post on my website in the next coming weeks. They're going to start advertising it in a few days from now. And it's a comprehensive course on like paradigm development, scientific studies, personal and collective evolution, and focus all on psychedelics, like 15 weeks. So that'll be up soon. And their website, sacredpractices.org. And hopefully I'll have a book out in like the next year. I'm mostly done, but like it takes a long time to kind of polish and send out.
Sure. And the new book that's coming out, what kind of topics are you going to be covering there?
Yeah, it's always hard to distill things in a small amount of words. The
Sure.
working title has been Psychedelic America. Kind of, I came from the mindset of like think globally, act locally. It's a country that I've been most influenced by that also has a lot of influence. So the first one, it's like ask clients, they all just send them in like their phenomenological experience, like before, during, and after ceremony. So you can see a lot of examples of transformation, showing, the dangers of psychedelics. It just needs to be talked about because people only hear often the good thing experiences. It's like cool. I come in with some level of caution and intention with this work. Then I'll be going through all the major psychedelic studies over the last, I know, 50 years, and with like 7 different psychedelics, like a lot of the main tryptamines, the phenethylamines as we talk, but also like iboga, LSD, ketamine. Then I'll be moving to America's kind of deep shadow and past with indigenous people. People came here 10 to 20,000 years ago, mostly using psychedelic in the Americas. 93% of them were killed. And so we lost a lot of deep history of people that worked with these medicines in their society. Then taught like a lot of psychedelics is shadow work. So about the major shadows I've undergone, from those genocides to slavery to a lot of the movements, that if we want deep integrity, we have to look at the past and learn from it. And then I'll have a chapter on technology and psychedelics, and sexuality and psychedelics, and then kind of ending with like the future of humanity. Given everything we know, what can we speculate how things are going to unfold?
Sounds like quite a book. So looking forward to seeing that coming out, and really congratulations on all the extra work you're doing out there, and for continuing to make it happen in the world, and for doing all your ceremonies that you're working with people too. So you're not just helping feel the cultural psyche, you're also helping individuals on a one-on-one level. So that's really amazing. It's all part of the process, right? It starts those ripples out there. So really thank you, Jehan, for being here today. Just a reminder, everybody out there, that we're going to be going live every 2 weeks, but this month we're doing a couple more interviews. So next week we'll be with Daniel Nova from Psychedelic Society
I
San
love
Francisco,
her.
and from San Francisco, or excuse me, Psychedelics of and Addiction. Some doing some great work out there right now. So she'll be speaking with us next Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Pacific. So tune in for that. This episode will be also posted next Sunday, most more than likely, on all the different platforms like Spotify, Apple, iRoom, or iHeart, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So check us out on all those platforms. And really want to say again, thank you so much for being here, Jahan. And it's been a long time coming for a nice, deep, long conversation. So it's great to really spend an hour where we just focused on diving into the psyche, so to speak, and then what is consciousness, which is such a beautiful question. So thank you for being here, and looking forward to more conversations in the future. Maybe when your next book comes out, we'll have you on for another episode or whatever, and talk a bit about it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
It's been really lovely being here with you guys. Thank you so much.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Jihan. And thank you everyone for listening in. Until next time, tune in, stay rooted, and let's grow together. Have a great Sunday. Bye bye now.